just because it's been a while, I thought we'd try and just touch base on a sort of go around the table basis and just what has the last couple of months changed, your view, or are you still of the same fixed opinion, or are you more informed, better informed, or more concerned, more worried, absolutely relieved? Kind of like the guy, I saw an article this morning. There's a chap from, I think it's the building safety regulator himself, saying everything's tickety-boo and on track.
Really?
Yeah. I'll share it. I think he's the only one in the industry who thinks that, but but I was happy for him. Hang on a sec, see what I can do.
Yeah.
Hang on.
I don't know. It's a hard one, isn't it? Just why you finding that, because I think oh, this guy here.
Yeah, absolutely on track. Tickety, no problems, and on track to meet agreed timescales. Bill White, hats off, son.
Is he at the Health and Safety Executive, or is he Director of Building Safety for this building safety, what do they call them?
Director of Building Safety.
He's got a bit of a regulator then, I'm guessing.
I think he works for the regulator.
I think he was at the day, wasn't he?
Yeah. From next month, it'll all come together.
Oh, but, I mean,
2 weeks. There you go.
Extraordinary.
And you had, on top of everything else, George, you had some specifics that you fired through earlier.
Yeah, I don't think it's as straightforward as Mr. White thinks, and in fact, one of the things that I think I'm coming across, the minute you go beyond the surface into any level of detail, it's clear that there's a lack of clarity. So we were asked to. This is as Active Plan. We're asked a contractor we work with picked up a scheme that was already in construction, but the company that was building it went bust. So they've inherited it, and it's got 4 blocks. One of the blocks is going to a social housing provider, and the other 3 blocks are private. So we were asked to put together what they would need, and when we did that, I was told that we only needed to do it for the social housing block, and that surprised me a bit, because I thought it would be that they're all the same, and they were told, their advice was that the three other blocks didn't need to follow the golden thread or go through the regulator. Now, I then asked a number of subject matter experts that I know as to whether this particular scheme, and I described the scheme without giving any detail away, in some detail, and of the 4 people I asked, 2 came back and said that it would need to go through Gateway 3, and 2 said it wouldn't. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, as I've drilled down a little bit further, I've found that the 2 that said it didn't need to go through Gateway 3 are actually correct, but it does need to go through building control. And building control under the new regime is going to be, or some of the building control organisations are going to be designated as the regulator. They're going to have the regulatory authority. So from what I can see, it's as bloody clear as mud. Yeah. And I think one of the big challenges that the industry's got is, therefore, if it's not clear, people will just say, well, we don't need to do it then. and we're going to go down to the lowest common denominator until something goes wrong.
Until they get pulled up. Yeah.
And I'm thinking that you know, there's something that we perhaps might be able to do to maybe pull together some people. It's because of interim measures apparently as well. That's one of the other aspects. But there's a lot of new legislation come out over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yep.
Which impacts on things.
Yeah.
You know, for example, you know, I keep, sorry, I'm going on a bit now, but I think there's quite a lot of uncertainty that we collectively, I think we've probably got the answers to, but it's a matter of how we can effectively help.
Yeah. We got involved in a consultation with PA Consulting. They were asking questions on mandatory and voluntary occurrence reporting. They were asking industry what they would like to think, you know, like to see, and how they see it, and how they understand it. And I think they'd been commissioned by Deluxe. But they interviewed the MD for Regional Build. I think they interviewed Mace as well, Paul, at some stage. I'm not sure who. But I was talking to the MD last week about, you know, where they're at and what the thinking was, and he was sort of not surprised, but he was relaying how PA Consulting, although they'd been commissioned, hadn't really done the research and hadn't really, they were asking some fairly naive questions. I didn't really know whether that was because they didn't know or because the people that they're reporting to don't know either.
Was this the code for for construction product safety you're talking about, that consultation?
No. This was for mandatory occurrence reporting. They were.
Okay.
I mean, they started off talking about high-rise buildings, and the MD said, "Well, I think it's higher risk. You know, you're a bit behind the curve there."
Yeah.
So all of the questions were sort of naive, is the nicest way I can put it.
But do you know, Martin, as well, just to say, just to be completely blunt with it, you know, these guys are asking people, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, it's probably going to sound it, but it's not, that have been in industry for 40 years, 50 years,
Yeah.
and they've always done it. They've always cut the bread the same way. So they're asking them, how are you going to cut the bread now? And they're going, I'm going to cut it this way still. Right? I think it's really difficult because this is such a different mindset change where you actually go, do you know what, Mr. Tier or Mrs. Tier 1 here, want to say it, you're now running the projects. You've got to make sure what you're building is safe. No different to regulatory reform 2005. And they're like, well, I want to palm the risk off. You can't. You can't. It's going to sit on your lap.
Can I just build on that for a second? Right. Yeah. So I was in a meeting on a project that we've been working on for the last couple of years, and the client basically said that for the safety case report and the information that they need, all they need is what went into building control. Right. Now, I've heard this quite a lot recently, that as long as it's past building control, then everything's fine. Right. So, and if building control don't pick up the fact that there are no door schedules, or that the inspection certificates haven't been provided, then that's also fine, because building control is the
gatekeeper.
Is the gatekeeper.
Well, see, this is just to build on that, George, as well, in the same context, is that I've just printed off the 3 bits this morning, which is the high risk buildings, building regulations, and the improved inspectors, because they always used to have in it, you can't be an interested party, which means no financial interest to design interest. So what they're saying is now, basically, if they get it wrong, we're just going to put them in prison for 10 years. So the fact is, they're just going to ask for everything. It's a bit like when we have building control come around sites now, we've been giving people a lot of education externally via different groups. They go, they don't want to actually know what's in the hole. They just say, tell me in test information how that's compliant. People can't process it. And that's what's going to happen. It's just going to grind to a halt. So it doesn't surprise me them saying, if building control get it wrong, we don't care because we're just going to go after them. That's passing the liability around, aren't they?
And can they pass that liability? That's the question.
Well, I don't think it would fundamentally remove the fact that what you've supplied is inadequate, because that's Regulation 7. You still be in the shits anyway. But they could go after after the regulator, the building control guys, and say, you've messed up. You've approved something which is incorrect. You're now in trouble. They could do that. Doesn't make it right still, does it?
The updated Regulation 38 that came out 3 weeks ago requires the client to verify that they have received everything that they need. So that's interesting, because for me anyway, because it sounds as though somebody's recognized that particular gap in the process. So,
yeah.
Are you aware of that, Martin?
Mm.
That new update
Yeah.
to Regulation 38.
Yeah. I think
Is
Paul's
it significant?
yeah, well, it's all significant. It's just, I don't know. You've got to take it all on board, haven't you? You can't take some of it on board.
The bit I'm going to say this, I'm sounding like a broken record with this, George, is that all this is coming in, and I'm sure, hopefully, Phil, you might agree with this as well. This is all coming in because no one actually knows how to choose something which is appropriate to the circumstances.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The most of the stuff we see coming out is because it's not that there's anything wrong with the kit. It's not where it should be. It's not appropriate for where it's been put. The wrong classification or something else that goes with it. That's what happens.
I mean, I'm looking at things. I'm trying to look at things, trying to simplify it, because, to be frank, I think that the number, as Martin's just said there, it's all important. But that can be a bit overwhelming.
It is.
Yeah, and the role of the principal designer and the principal contractor seems to now be becoming critical. So I had a chat last week. I'm trying to understand now, because I've spoken to I went to a seminar in Leeds a few weeks ago where there was a building control company called Ascent, who are quite a big company, I believe. And they were explaining what they're doing in terms of the Building Safety Act. And they were saying that they're going to be applying to become one of these, I can't remember what that's accredited, or they're going to become a golden thread. Sorry, a regulator, an approved regulator. Is that what Paul called it?
Yeah, there's different titles, but I think I know what you mean. They work for the BSR.
Yes.
As part of their MDT, multidisciplinary team. Yeah.
So therefore, they're the ones. I was just saying, Paul, the building safety, building control acting as the regulator.
Yeah.
So I was talking with Ascent, and they were saying that's what they were applying for. And then somebody in the rest of somebody else was asking about principal designer, and I can't remember whether Ascent said that they were also going to become principal designers. Excuse me.
Wow.
Can I ask a question while we're all here? Sorry, to be a pain, and just really, it's probably one for you, Phil, really, to get me head around it, because obviously you've got the code for construction product information, which you're obviously working on, yeah, or you're driving it. I'm not sure what the crack with. Oh, I can't even look at it. That website is brilliant. because one of the biggest things that I've come across, this you might be able to help with this, Phil, as well, actually, is that some of the work we've done in this group, which you wouldn't have seen. I mean, it might be worth sharing some stuff with you anyway around the whole change control process and the rest of it. Because I'll be honest with you, George, for you as well, looking at what was what's come out in that legislation, we hit the nail on the head 2 years ago with it.
Mm.
The whole change control process about how things go through, all the stuff around making sure how you get to the appropriate product, all that we were miles in front of it, because it's because you've got all the experts together on how you get to appropriate materials, and functional, dynamic systems and passive and active and transient systems for fire protection. So we were pretty much miles in front of it. So I know you're doing this CCPI, Phil. What's involved with it? Is it a tag that just goes on the products? I've seen quite a bit. I've not had a chance to actually research it, to be quite honest with you.
Okay, so the CCPI, and obviously just to make clear my position, I'm a freelance verifier for them. So I provided my services to them. They allocate the work, and obviously there's a team of verifiers who go for the information. So the really the code, and it's a voluntary code that they're asking manufacturers to sign up for, really to make sure that their information is validated and meets the 11 clauses of the code. So they're really just to make sure that it's up to date, it's transparent, it's unambiguous. And manufacturers subscribe like a data set, so a number of their items, typically the ones that are the high risk, and we go through a process of validating that information against the clauses. And there's also a leadership and culture element as well, and there is a management systems review as well, for which they do also submit information. So all of that together is combined, and then we as a verification team submit the information to back, and then there's a panel that goes through and decides whether they've passed the code or not. And at that point, then should they be successful, the CCPI then it's like a kite mark, I suppose. It's like a stamp against a range of products to say that the information against these items meets the code. And it's all about trying to create that, remove that marketing ambiguity in a lot of cases, and make sure that they're making claims that are true and can be substantiated. But as I said, it's important to stress it is a voluntary code that they're asking manufacturers to sign up to.
The reason I was asking is because I did one recently on the code for product safety standards with the government, and I've got a follow up. It ended up being a 3-hour session. And I'm sure George will vouch for us on this, is there's not many products I don't know the ins and outs of how they're manufactured, tested, bolted together, QA'd, sent out the door, factory control. I get involved in all of this stuff, not that I want to, I've had to. So the interesting thing for me is when Mr. Morrell, no disrespect to Mr. Morrell, by the way, said there's a problem with the manufacturers, in my experience, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing the reverse, right? So what I'm seeing is actually the manufacturers have a product, forgetting cladding on the side, because I think everyone's got the cladding thing in their head over Celotex and the rest of it, and the magnesium strip where they put in basically the fuse wire for the cladding panels. Generally, most manufacturers have a product which will meet the circumstances of your product if you can identify what your circumstances are. And what I've seen is that because we can't identify, actually, like a good example would be there's a standard for smoke control dampers which have a limitation on pressure of about 1500 negative pascals. So if you're doing things like train tunnels and cargo tunnels which are 10 to 20,000 pascals, you won't be using one of them. But they are CE marked. They've got quality standards, factory control position, but they're not appropriate for high pressure atmosphere or high corrosive atmospheres. Just blow the bloody doors off. And this is what I've seen, is that we're actually selecting components because we're going, is it CE marked? Well, actually, like, I think one of the things that would be good for you to see, I think, from us, is that when we generated things like the fire dampers and the smoke control, we generated all the ontology list, didn't we, George, for actually all the things that are important to that product. And for a bit of fire resistant duct, there's about 100 things you need to understand before you actually can, basically install it or select it. It's not just integrity, insulation, and low leakage for smoke. There's like 100 different things that come into it: substrate, anchors, rod sizes, seal material, depths, thickness. It's mental. I think that was a bit that's, it's quite interesting. We were actually looking, probably it's got to be, I mean, because your diagram originally, George, with the golden keys on it, I see that come up the other day in someone else's lecture, made me chuckle, because obviously it's getting around now, which is really, really
Yeah.
good for you. And you've seen it yourself, haven't you? It keeps popping up when you go,
Yeah.
seen that before. It's good. So you look at it and you go, this is inherently complex to select the right product, and actually the manufacturers, I don't think they're trying to be, unambiguous. Is that some of the things that come into it aren't for the manufacturer to declare because they don't know. You've got to know your hand before you go there, because they're DOPs. Declarations of performance is only speaking certain language, and a good designer, and this isn't an architect of building service, God knows who it is at the moment, because we're in a bit of trouble with the competency gap, can select something to meet a condition based upon all the factors, its pressure, air volume, rates of smoke exhaust, whatever you're doing, on depend on the system. Even down to fire doors are complex, because you've got to get the security right and the DDA right before you even consider the fire element of it. This is what we kind of found. This is what was interesting going through this thing the other day. That's what I was asking about, how the CCPI works. If we could get some information on it as well, because what I've seen is actually the products aren't really the problem. It's the selectors that are at fault. That makes sense.
Yeah, you're right, and the CCPI isn't claimed to be a panacea, but it's a tool within the armoury to try and drive the changes in the industry, and it's about cleansing and clarifying the information that manufacturers provide in their catalogues and websites, so that when selections are made based on the criteria you've just gone through there, you can be assured that that what you're reading has been validated, it's been verified, has been
I'm not criticising,
truthful.
by the way. I think I actually commented on this for SIPSI originally, actually, when it came out. I think I commented on this originally.
Yeah.
But
that's what I was asking, because there's loads of things I need to transpose to people in the business to say, actually, these are all the tools that are in your arsenal. But it's a bit like, you've got to get people that can understand it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I suppose the CCPI are doing webinars where manufacturers and I suppose anybody can sign up and get an understanding of what they're offering. Obviously, they're mainly targeting the manufacturers because they're looking to bring them on board. But it's the kind of, I suppose time will tell how effective it is, really. But cleansing the information and making sure that the ambiguity from the information is removed is no bad thing. It's just that there are other elements as well, like you've explained there, which may impact on it, which I suppose we'll see as time goes on.
I think the other thing is that Phil and I have discussed this in the past as well. The standardization of the way the attributes of certain types of products are described, and Ian, I know you've been looking at this as well, and we've hit a bit of a barrier with that at the moment, because manufacturers are resistant. Certainly, quite a few manufacturers are resistant to providing their information in that standardized format. We've got the technology now to do it, but it's a matter of getting that to be agreed. So the CCPI isn't going to be addressing that bit, or is it, Phil?
No, it's not. Yeah.
Now, what one of the things that I thought we might be able to do, and we had a workshop that Ian participated in June on fire doors, and we had about 40 odd people on the workshop, and we actually it was a deep dive into the guidance that we produced for BRAC probably 18 months ago. So we're basically reviewing it on the basis of our current understanding of what was needed. And what was really interesting for me, because I was listening to it, last week, to just go through it again, because there are things that it just shows how complex this is. We're in the conversation, and there's things like there's declarations of performance, but there's also certificates of conformity, and I don't really understand what the differences are between those. But
I'll tell you, Jules, what you've got is that when you put a product through test and it gets classified, in order for you to sell it, you have to have what's called a certificate of continuous performance. So they come around, do the factory control procedures, check nothing's changed. Then that gets updated, then you can reissue your DOP. That's a declaration of what you've got on your continuous certificate of performance as well. So it's a QA check on how the people do stuff. So if you look at the BRE thing recently, there was some additional tests that they did, and you'd have BRE would go and inspect their factory. But the fact is, they've already got a process under the European test norm for checking the factory anyway. It's a check on a check. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's how it kind of works, which is if you're going to sell something, you've got to be able to prove that it's continually performing. And how if they come around, they should have gone, hold on a minute, said a text if it was, or Kingspan, what's this thing you put in there? No one picked up on it. There's a few layers of failure there that's gone on, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So
is that the certificate of conformity?
Well, it's the certificate of continuous performance.
No, this is called a certificate of conformity.
Okay.
Anyway, the other thing is that what the housing association on the call was asking for was a data sheet from the door manufacturer to say what had been installed, including the door closer that have been used, and also the ironmongery, because she explained that they needed that so that if they needed to replace it at some stage, they wanted to be able to replace it with a door closer that was of the same type. And what was interesting was that we got a couple of door manufacturers on the call, and they were willing to provide the information, but when we then drilled into it in a bit more detail, there was elements of it that they couldn't provide or wouldn't provide. Now, I thought at the time that they were being difficult, right? But actually, when I listen to it again, it is more complex. And it's adequately complex that people would give up. Yeah. I mean, what she was asking was a reasonable question in terms of, okay, I need to replace the door closer. Can you tell me what door closer would I can use that isn't going to breach the test, that the certification? And they said, well, no, we can't do that. You can go onto this website where you can find out that information, which I think is good, but you can't download it, right? And it just seemed a bit odd. And I guess what I'm saying is that for the golden thread to work, we need that information to be available in a form that is sustainable and will be around for the next 20 or 30 years. And we can't be reliant on one website actually being up, because, to be frank, in my experience, I've been doing this only for about 10 years, the number of door manufacturers that have disappeared is sorry, I'm talking about your subject matter expert area, but you've got your hand up.
Go for it, man.
I was only going to say that you can't just ride roughshod over IP in the process. Manufacturers have IP information that they've developed through tests, and they're not necessarily going to want to disclose that in a way that their competitors can download it and learn from it. And I think that's the challenge. And that's why there has to be an element of trust in the process. And we need to structure information so that product data sheets are cumulative of those parts, and manufacturers release at what level the information that they're prepared to release. And then you go back to the manufacturer. And if you can't then replace that with, if you can't get information about closing the hinge, it might be you have to replace the product.
Yeah.
But in the same way as the kernel's under no specific responsibility to release his ingredients for his special recipe for Kentucky Fried Chicken, manufacturers can't be expected to release their recipes. It's just not commercially practical for them.
So what? Yeah. So if a £100 door closer breaks, you might need to replace a £3,000 fire door.
Possibly, if the manufacturers, I mean, but you should be able to go back to the manufacturer, who can then supply you with information about how to replace that closer.
You know, this is when you need Douglas, isn't it? Because do you know, Ian, right, I haven't got into doors yet, right? And just to go back a bit, certificate of constancy of performance is what I was talking about, George. I'm not too sure what you're asking for actually exists.
Okay, I'll go back to my I'll check.
Yeah, because you might have stuff like that around EPDs or other things when you conform, but I'm not sure how it works. But I don't think you've got that with this. I think you've got DOPs and you've got consistency of performance, basically.
Okay.
One proves to the other. You know, it's like we will say things and so, you know, don't confuse matter. But getting back to your point here, Ian, one of the big things with this is that all of those individual products have CE markings as well.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's what makes it even harder. So actually, if you change a door closer, you've got to say, what was the door closer for? Was it to make it easier for people to push the door open? Or was it to make sure it's shut in fire? Because that's two different functions, isn't it? And that's
It's no easier. It's no
No.
easier. Doing a replacement's no easier than doing the original design. If you can't replace like for like, then you're back to square one, and you've got to get it approved or tested, because invariably the information's not there. Either because of IP, as Ian said, or it's not there. It's too difficult or too hard.
But they're different problems, aren't they? It's not there is a historic thing. It's not. Yeah, the lack of information shouldn't be the issue moving forward. It's what people are. But and again, that's a commercial decision you're going to make depending on who you buy from, isn't it?
Yeah. But if it's relating to structural fire safety, you've got to get it tested now, or you've got to get sign off from somebody who says it'll be okay to replace it with not like for like.
Well, it does depend. I mean, it's all these things. It does depend, because if you look at the certificated products, normally they will provide you with scope and instruction. So the scope, but if you look at, I don't know, take certified, I know the certifier scheme the best. Normally, if you look at the scope for a door, which should be easily accessible through the manufacturer and the certification company, you would get a statement within that to say what range of closures it has been tested with. So that's not available for certificated products. You would get a scope statement which would cover this.
So that should be available as a document.
Yeah, scope that's downloadable from your
Original supplier.
Yeah, and from the certification company. Normally, there's a scope document there.
Yeah. Should answer most questions, George, but not all. I would have thought. That's the truth.
So therefore, whatever that, it shouldn't be, in my view, it shouldn't be up to the client to have to go and search out who the certification company was. I think that ought to be something that is provided as part of the O&M.
Yeah, but it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
No, well, the fact is that it isn't, Ian. That's my frustration.
No. It wasn't. But
it still isn't.
It will be.
It still isn't. Yeah, it should be. I agree. But because nobody's checking and nobody's clear about what it is that they need to ask for, I think the problem. I mean, we're doing a review at the moment of a building that 2 blocks that have just been handed over to a client, a social landlord, and there's no door schedules. Yeah, there's no information on any of the internal doors that have been provided.
Wow.
There's no record of who actually installed them. Right, and yet it's been through building control.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to back this up, really, this is probably good actually for you know, Philip, just I'm not trying to single you out for this. Is about getting your knowledge basically and what we've done and how you see things. But it's good. It's good for all of us. I'll just show you this quickly, right? Because you mentioned the infamous word there again, George, of schedules, right?
Yeah.
It's all about scheduling, and a bit more scheduling if you can do it. You shared the wrong screen. Brilliant. Let's bring this one here over here quickly. So when you looked at things like the pipework world,
Can you make it bigger?
I can do, yeah. How's that, George? I'm joking. That's just gone the wrong way on purpose. Sorry.
That's better.
And you know, I sent this out a while ago to you. You know, it's just in case I send it again. But basically, when you start putting things through walls, and doors is a thing you put in a wall or through it. It's like a damper. It's just a vertically installed static component with a transient function for movement. You still got to know what all the function of all of those components is put on the door for. Security might be a multi-thread lock, and it's got a fail-safe secure function from one side, but a free exit from the other. All these things have got to be recorded in such a way that anyone wants to change it in future, you know exactly why it was put there, the risk of the space. You look at door schedules; they don't exist with that information anymore, George, do they? It's gone. We've lost that niche of doing it properly. So you can just kind of see it's gone a bit funny. This says you can just kind of see that's gone funny. Look, it's all going to have alignment.
Yeah.
But you can kind of see all the things that are involved just in pipes, and it's no different for doors. I was actually speaking to CeeLo recently, and I spoke to Douglas a while ago about getting something similar put together actually on a basis of what a door schedule should look like now.
Ah,
Do
okay.
you know what I mean? Because we did the ontology, didn't we, George, for dampers, for ducts,
Yeah.
and a few other bits and bobs, and it was crazy. And I think, you know, probably for you, Philip, if you've not seen where we got to with that, probably still got one open here. Actually, I have. If you look at this, is the infamous BIM coordination sheet. It'll take a couple of seconds to come up, and it literally does take a couple of seconds, doesn't it? Just it takes a while to respool. There's so much information in it. Come on, you can do it, computer. You can handle it. It's hot in here today. I don't know where you are, but it's hot in this office.
We're following a racing methodology on this, Phil.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
should
will
be
come.
familiar.
It's just got a lot of tick boxes in it. It just takes a couple of seconds to spool through. Here we go. It's coming. I haven't got the best IT in the world, to be quite frank. It's just PC. You know, I think it came out of a box of Callum's cornflakes, to be quite frank. With the He-Man stickers. Oh, and it will come. It will come. Oh, anti-climax, George, eh? What you think is going to be quick, and you learn your lesson.
Yeah,
Here we
to.
go.
Oh, there we go.
So you can see all the data around actually the function of why the kit should be there. The function of the wall is next, because you've got to know what function of wall you need depending on the orientation. You've got to record that as well, because this is about future change and maintenance and doing work. There's all the different wall substrates that you can have it in. It has a big effect. So when we say this is where we went, when I can't find the video, but I did comment the CCPI probably about 2 years ago when it came out for consultation. I'm sure it's the same thing. You've then got to know actually, this is about HR orientation, HO, that it's the basic stuff, you know, what's its lifespan, all the other things that would come into it are at the bottom, what level of detail is it going to be drawn in, etc. But the big thing is there's so much more.
So the question I've got is to how would this then, you know, in practice, how is this going to be checked? And because these are all obviously critical things that need to be considered.
Yeah.
Now, but what mechanism is there for that to be done or checked? I mean, I was speaking with Scott Sanderson last week from PRP. Now, the reason for that was that this role of principal designer seems to be, or principal contractor, seems to be going to be a pivotal role, because they're the ones who have apparently got to sign off that that building regs have been followed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's carrying with it a substantial amount of liability. Because if they are, as Scott said, he can look at things from or PRP can look at things from an architectural point of view, but they're not, they don't have the expertise to do structure or building services. So as principal designer, they're looking at the methodology that they will have to follow to cover their PI cover to be able to do that verification.
All they'll do is, George, and we were talking about this with me briefly the other day, is that they'll just say, give me the data, give me the data, give me the data. So it's all going to come down to the PCs, and I think the PCs are fooling themselves at the moment, thinking they're going to put this onto a supply chain or even a consultant. They're going to get caught out. And speaking to other people out there, I think they've all got the same view. We're going to get, if we sit there and do nothing and don't schedule stuff out and do it properly, we are going to get caught out royally. Because when you look at, and I don't know if anyone had a chance to look at any of this, right? But this was about, major changes and things like that. So when you sit there and you go, the change of any construction product or building element used on a proposed high-risk building that is a replacement of a lower classification under the reactions part within the meaning of regulation 2. So other things that are in here about hole sizes, it's all in here, and they've picked it up pretty well. So the thing is as well, if you don't get it right first of all, which is one headache, and you put it in and building control and pick it up because they're not confident to, because it's actually quite technical, and suddenly you realise later on that it's wrong. The bit you've got to be careful of, which is where the entrapment really comes into this legislation. I'll tell you what it is. I've got it on my phone. I'm just going to find it. 1 second, George. It's about what your liability is in relation to going to prison and stuff like that, and fines. I forget you posted it the other day, but I took a nice screenshot of it. And it says, 1 second, if you provide false or misleading information, it's a criminal offence, triable as an either way offence, basically. A limited 1 year imprisonment, a limited fine, 1 year imprisonment, 2 years of imprisonment for Crown Court, And if you do a contravention, you can still get fined as well, but you might get served a compliance notice to sort it out. But the big thing is if you provide false or misleading information. So someone sits there and goes, I've given you information on how this smoke control system works, but actually it's false. It's not based upon the right input parameters, and actually you've inadvertently misled building control, or whether the person's going to be assigned to be the regulator, you can get yourself into trouble. And the thing is as well, this is a bit like about all this stuff about in scope, out of scope. The bottom line is, if someone's going to complain about something you've done, they're going to go to the HSC anyway. So just don't mislead. If you don't know, don't say a word. Just basically only act within the limitations of what you know, and don't give stuff over which you believe to be false and misleading. It's really strong how they put it all together. That's why this guy's saying he thinks it's going pretty well. I'm kind of thinking, actually, I tend to agree with him. We're not too sure about what's in scope at the moment, what's not. That's a slightly different question. But the bottom line is, as I've kind of indicated, they're going to regulate you against what we should have been doing properly for the last 20 years. Do you know what I say? I'm kind of seeing it, and I'm like, how you get to appropriate is the hardest thing. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. And I guess one of the challenges, therefore, is at the moment we're in an industry where it's endemic that risk is transferred down to probably the people that are least competent to actually take on that responsibility. And from what I understand, the new legislation removes that opportunity. And I think, I think clients now aren't able to pass the risk on to Balfour Beatty, say, or Mace.
Wow.
And you're not able to pass it on to other people. Everybody, it's a collective liability.
About that, George, mate, you talk about behaviour. I've seen a client recently we were looking at work with, and the same old stuff come out. You're too risk adverse. And this is a residential high-end. You're not too risk adverse. We were telling you we're going to stop you getting sued because you clearly don't understand this. Nah, I'm not interested, mate. They just want to carry on as normal.
Mm.
You're seeing this, and they want to carry on like this stuff. It's just going to somehow fix itself. And it's not. You know what I mean, George? It's just for everyone probably in the call. There's such a limited amount of competence in the industry to deal with this. It is frightening as well. So and
Yeah.
I don't mean that to be rude, because the fact is it's all about systems now. Do you know what I mean? You can't have someone just design a piece of facade and go, "That's it, I'm done." And you go, then you look at it and you go, "What about all this stuff above it?" And they go, "Well, that's someone else." You go, "No, can't do that anymore." Do you know what I mean?
Just going back there, George, to your contacts who were sort of mapping out what they needed to do in order to be principal designer. What was the outcome? Which road did they go down?
Well, what Scott said was that he's a member of a group, and there's 8 large architects who are involved in housing.
Mm.
And he said when we got involved, when we were talking about this a year ago, he said we were the only ones that were going to go down the principal designer route. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said my rationale for doing that was if we didn't do it, we wouldn't get any work.
Okay.
Right. And he said now all 8 have now decided that they're going to offer principal designer services.
Interesting.
For the same reason. Now, therefore, it's clearly getting traction. So I'm now trying to talk to those people to find out how they're interpreting it, because they're thinking of it. Principal designer is thinking of it that most people think of that as being CDM.
Oh no, it's not. Yeah.
It's quite different, isn't it?
Yeah, very.
So, as I understand it.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do, just in a simple, I try and, it may not seem it, but I try and distill things down into a simple sort of yes or no side of things. Is to basically say, okay, what information is clearly and obviously required, and how do we ensure that that can be provided? And as Ian's saying there, I'm not in any way trying to undermine the IP side of it from the manufacturer's point of view, because I obviously understand the criticality of that. But it's also a matter of making sure that everybody is getting the information that they require. And if that means that there needs to be some sort of secure way of that information being shared, so that competitors can't just pick it up and use it, then yeah, let's recognize that's something that is easily done. It's just a matter of understanding what level of information we need to avoid. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, so I've just got back. So I sent the graph sync out the printer, because if you leave it there for too long, it gets all muddled up. We have to do it again. So I do apologise.
Yeah. So coming back to your question on that, Martin, is I think we need to have much clearer information about what's required, because the other aspect of it in this conversation that I'm having on the housing association project, where things clearly aren't complying with building regs, aren't what is listed in regulation 38 has definitely not been provided. But my own internal team is saying, well, did the client ask for it? And I said, well, I don't think that's relevant, is it? If it's needed for building regs, yeah, it is relevant, because if the client didn't ask for door schedules, why would the supply chain provide them? Yeah. And I guess maybe that's too simple an example, but I think that is something that we need to be encouraging clients to get engaged in, because at the moment they don't get engaged, do they, adequately? Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
I mean, AI employs information requirements and asset information requirements and organization information requirements that are part of the BIM process are so surface level. You know, I was talking to a client the other day and they were quoting BS 8536 as being something that was needed. And I said, have you actually read it? This is they'd put this into their contract. And I wasn't being rude, but I've read it. Yeah. And it's 100 pages and it's very good, very detailed, but it covers a whole range of different things about sustainability and decarbonisation and all that sort of stuff, all stuff that's really worth doing. But this had just been put in as being a clause. And having worked with contractors, I doubt that anybody will have actually downloaded it and studied it. You know, maybe I'm wrong, but you know, they quoted two things. They said it needs to comply with ISO 19650.
Good.
Yeah.
Yep.
But Martin, that is so high level.
I know.
Because what you're defining there is just processes, not levels of detail. And then 8536 does go down into more of the level of detail. But yeah, anyway, I think people, the client needs to take more responsibility for determining what is it that they're going to be procuring in terms of information, and then checking against that.
Yeah. Who does your average customer or client turn to when they you know, they need help with this sort of thing? That's where it starts to go wrong, I think, because
Yes, I agree.
invariably they go to PQSs or PMs who tend to worry about the contractual side of life rather than what you're actually going to need in order to run this building for the next 50 years.
Agreed.
Yeah. If they yeah, generally speaking, customers and clients could do with better advice early doors, because it's not something you know you get taught at school, is it? It's not something you're born knowing. Somebody has to point you in the right direction, and intelligent customers know their way around this sort of stuff, but most of the ones we get to deal with don't know some of the basics, and so they don't. You know, they don't. You're not obliged to give them stuff that they really should be asking for.
I think, in fairness as well, Martin, that let's be honest here, right? Is that I have battles. I'm sure you do as well, Martin. Where you go, the client needs to have all of this as well. People go, don't overload them, don't tell them, don't do this, don't give them that. Don't you know what I mean? That no one ever wants, because they're worried about what's going to be done with it. Oh, the price might go up.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, that happens throughout the chain, doesn't it? From the customer to the principal contractor, all the way through the chain, that happens.
Oh, nuts. Do you want it to go up now, or do you want it to go up at the end when you're firmly involved in it and you can't get out? Because that rug is a bit bouncy at the moment. I don't think I can fit that one under it. This is what goes on. So when you come back to like Ian's, some great points going on out there in the industry around about supply chain, if it doesn't marry up and, you know, we can't get the cost back, it goes down the line, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's the crazy thing with it all.
So I think customers could do with better advice. I was surprised though, George, that you've got the principal designers sort of queuing up to be principal designers. We're seeing the opposite.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're queuing up. I think they're just learning at the moment of what's you know, what's coming down the line. But what was interesting was, as I say, speaking to Scott, in terms of, because one of the things I was concerned about was if people are doing if they're building control, and building control start to offer that service of principal designer, I can't see how somebody that hasn't been involved in the design to some extent will be able to come up with to be able to make the assessment. How can a third party that's got no design expertise be a principal designer? I know that they're not supposed to be a principal designer, but they're not supposed to be. They're not doing design work. Sorry, Ian.
No, so just wondered, just back to Martin's point, did you say you're getting people resistant to be principal designers? So have you got a situation where you've got projects where nobody's prepared to be the principal designer?
Yeah. It's what's driving what we're seeing is, excuse me, more drive towards the siloed approach. Ask me anything you like to on architecture, and I'll give you an answer. But beyond that, not interested.
So there's a real danger if you've got a project that could start on 10th of October, say, and you don't have a principal designer in place, ergo the project can't start.
It's convincing people or getting people to step up and say, yeah, we'll do that. We'll take that responsibility on, because a lot of people are just looking at all of the stuff that gets aligned with principal design and a principal designer role under BSA and think that's not for me. Even if I do get an extra 0.5% or whatever fee, we're seeing a reluctance.
Yes.
I'll have to Fionn here. Sorry, I'm late into the call. I'll have to check back with. Hi guys. I've been listening intently on that one. But all I can offer is that I'll go and talk to Mark, Mark Bradfield, be directly involved in kind of high level appointment discussions with our architects. But I can imagine we are having the same type of conversation, because it's hard enough to get someone to really sign up to be a lead designer.
Yeah.
So right now in the world that we're living in with Bouygues, it's hard enough to get a lead designer in to really do what they ought to do as a lead designer, and we've been offloading the principal designer element to a specialist.
I mean, that feels like something we need to bring out at a strategic level, because that's. I mean, some of the stuff we talked about this morning is obviously very detailed, and and it will be nuanced by project. Each project is going to be slightly different because there isn't a stock process at the moment, and I'm sure it will standardise as we move forward over time. But the first rule of Gateway 2 is demonstrates the building safety regulator that it complies. Whether you can or can't change the closure in the future won't necessarily come into that conversation at this stage. And it may or may not come into conversation at Gateway 3. I think Gateway 3 will be more about inspection protocols and making sure that that's handed over. So I think some of those things are sort of it's a problem, but it's not necessarily a problem with getting us through the gateways. If the issue is that we cannot get people to stand up and be principal designer, that's a deal breaker, right? Because none of the rest of this matters, because the project cannot start until you've got a principal designer.
Is it likely that a main contractor is going to have to step in and say we'll have to take that then, in lieu of being able to offload it onto another party? We gotta absorb that and just.
I think that is ultimately who else?
Yeah, it has to be, doesn't it?
Paul shaking his head. Yeah, no, we're not keen either, but I can see a lot of pressure coming on, particularly from public sector. For no one else will do it. You can do it, Mr. Contractor.
Can I make you laugh, Martin? I don't think anyone that runs these construction companies actually knows what a principal designer does.
Yeah,
that is the problem. And it's a bit like the unicorn, isn't it? You read about it in books. It's got a great big horn. They're fluffy. Children love them, but you never see one in practice, right? So the bottom line with this is they're all going, yeah, that principal designer person, which, to be honest, to be frank with you, no one really knows what they're doing, because they're not really doing anything apart from passing information. No disrespect to it, because they can't be experts on everything like building control can't be. Yeah, we'll just put it into their camp, see how they get on with that. Well, we can see what's going on. Most of the architects are going, we can't do this. There's been some rumbling that some of the former building control guys are setting up companies to be that function, which makes a bit more sense. But you sort of go, I think everyone's just got to stop, because like in every process, there's one bit which becomes the bit that's flawed. That will end up that's it. That box, put it in there. That's it. Principal designer, stick it in there. They've got to deal with it. All they're going to do is go, just give me the information. I don't understand that. Can you tell me again? Can you show it me differently? I just think I do really think when you look at this, I know I've been a bit cynical here, is that if you know how to tell the shape and form and risk category of your building and what's in there, and you can schedule things out like the good old days, like door schedules, dampers, ducts, pipe work, you know, you can go through things properly, then actually you shouldn't have a really big problem. I think the problem will come in is that if you start declaring your hand at Gateway 2 and you start saying to clients, look, had a quick look at this, by the way, all your walls are wrong, nothing fits, and I can't actually install it anyway and access it for the future. That's the bit we're talking about. That's got to come out on the table early, and everyone's got to be on the same hymn sheet to say that's the reality. Your geometry is too small. Do you know what I mean? The rack thing's another eye opener, isn't it? Let's talk about rack. Do you know what I mean? You've got a building safety, act coming in with basically all the schools which would be in the high risk building categories have all got a fairly straight away under the act. So the rack's no good.
I'm going to have to duck off in 5 minutes, guys.
I've got it as well, actually.
Things that statement about principal designers, I feel it's not one I can just leave alone, because that feels like that's So all the other thing, in a way, going back to that original article you shared, Martin, so that by hook or by crook, I imagine we'll get things through the gateways over the next coming months, and there'll be a few issues that get kicked back and things that get missed and things that get spotted, and the process will start to sort of form, and then it will be easier to digitalise during at the moment. I think that's the big thing, is until it starts to standardise, it's nigh on impossible to digitalise golden thread it. But there'll be sort of a golden thread for each project until it's a more standard approach. But if we genuinely can't get principal designers, now I know through the Construction Leadership Council's Professional Indemnity Insurance Group that there's still issues around from the insurance to cover it. But I don't know who to tell what to take it forward to, but at some point I think we've got to raise this at the Construction Leadership Council level on a serious point, because it's all for the birds. Everything else we're talking about is for the birds if we don't get principal designers.
I think one of the keys to that, Ian, is what Paul was just saying there earlier. You need to determine what is it that a principal designer under the Building Safety Act is actually doing.
But that is defined in the regulation. The responsibility is defined. Yeah, the responsibility is set down in the regs. It's all set down in the secondary regulations.
Wings.
It's set down at a regulatory point, so it will be nuanced at a project level. But fundamentally, the responsibilities are laid out. We're not going to learn any more from the regulator.
No.
And we know what it is from a CDM perspective, and whilst it's different, the principles apply. It's the outputs that's different, not the inputs, really.
Okay.
So I'll pick this up as an action, but I don't know what the action is. Because there isn't like a construction leadership group that we can take this forward to.
I don't think even the CLC's onto this one.
No.
Ian, would you mind sending me where that's defined? That would help me.
I struggle to, George, today, because I've literally, the reason I've got to sort of rudely duck out is because I've got to drive down to Reading now. So I've got
sure.
So I'm going to be in the car. I'm not sure what time I'm getting back tonight, but it's somewhere
I'll try and find you something, George.
It's somewhere in the secondary regs, George. It's literally somewhere in the secondary regs.
Ian, would it be responsible actors? Would it be under there? I'm just okay. I'll have a dig. I'll have a dig around.
I've definitely, I can't quite where it is at the moment, but it's definitely written down and it's also written down at a gateway point what they expect to see in terms of. So the secondary regs does lay down everything we're going to know now. It lays down exactly what they're going to want to see as part of the compliance documentation.
Great.
So yes, all the secondary regs. It's kind of been. It's there now. This is all we're going to get. We're not going to get any more. We might get a bit more on golden thread, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But the rest of it's there. This is it.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, Ian. That's really helpful.
I'm not sure it is, George. I feel like I'm kind of just plowing in at the end because I'm in a rush to get away. But I try and pick up at CLC level the concerns raised. Would it be okay for me to cite this meeting, Martin, to say that there was several main contractors on here and there was a concern about the people stepping up as principal designer, and is this something we should be investigating in more detail, because everything else is for the birds if we don't get it sorted?
Yeah, no names, no back, Jill, but yeah.
I can't see any issue with doing that. It's being honest here, there's a you know, if nothing else, appointments will need to be looked at in the very rapidly, won't they? So there's
Maybe it's
definitely
a
a conversation.
Maybe it's a Build UK. If I raise it with Build UK, maybe it's something there because they have their call every few weeks, don't they? There's one coming up.
Yeah.
And they can go around. They can maybe do a survey of the main contractors to see if that's a problem that others are experiencing. So let me pick that up. Sorry guys, I'm going to have to fly there. Apologies, I'm ducking out early and I've contributed very little. So good luck with the rest of the meeting and humble apologies.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, so if we can get some sort of clarity on who's got to do what on which projects, I think we'll have moved something forward from today.
There it is, Jules. There, look.
Okay. Not sure it.
There'll probably be some more anyway on it, George. But it's quite a few references to it. So we'll dig something out for it, mate.
Yeah.
I think you captured it earlier, George. You said they're pivotal. That's exactly right. They are absolutely.
Whitehall,
before that's quite an accurate description. But before work start on site, they're the people that make it happen. And you know, to get through those gateways, I think it's going to be a tough ask, and a lot of people must be thinking, just we haven't got it. You know,
yeah.
Large international multi-disc organisation might have it, but do they have the whether they got the appetite or not? We'd have to ask them. But not seeing people rushing at it.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm thinking at the moment is if we can systemize some of the processes here, it's going to make it a lot easier for people to provide them with the information that they need, and it's going to make it a lot easier for them to check. So therefore, it becomes more manageable, if that makes sense.
But it goes back to what Paul was saying about design and replacement of not like for like. It's no matter how systemized and you know how accurate the lists are, there's still an element of design interpretation required in order to.
Of course,
makes it, you know, interpretation makes it more prone to error, I suppose.
I mean, the approach that we're taking on building on Regulation 38 is that we basically looked at it. I'm talking about as active plan now. What we've done is we've looked at what's in the clause, and it actually details exactly what information is required.
Yeah, it's very good. It's a great starting point for any project.
Exactly. So I'll just show you this is our interpretation of it, and it does appear that the majority of it at the moment is only required as a document, but you've got here as-built plans, ironmongery is spelled wrong, and the locations of all those different elements, and in particular these are the ones that I've focused on because these are all asset types. But this is so what we're thinking at the moment is if the client within their information requirements specifies that they do want to know where all the emergency lighting is, for example, then that's something that you either have or you haven't provided it. Yeah, so that's quite binary. Now the question then is it fit for purpose? You know, because again, we've come across things where the fire stopping information, for example, you can't read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or we've just done one where BB7, who are a good fire engineering company, they've obviously done something using Bolster or something like that, and they've zoomed out, or whoever it is that's produced the O&M has zoomed out, so all of the fire stopping information just completely overlaps each other, and all you've got is a PDF image of it. So actually, it's useless, right? But in terms of the tick in the box, has it been? Have you had a document? The answer is yes. Is the document
Fit for purpose?
Fit for purpose?
No. Yeah.
And that's where I think that the principal designer should be steered towards: is the document there or not? Yeah, and then the validation of that document is something that is then their judgment. And Scott thought that was a good methodology.
Yeah. Good starting point, absolutely.
And then also the information that comes through on the product information. Does the product information carry the the product data sheets, for example? Does it actually include the information that the principal designer would think is needed? So that's a judgment call again.
Yeah.
But at least if they've then confirmed that they've seen it, they've looked at it, and they've not just
incorporated it. Yeah.
Yeah. They've not just looked at 10%, which is, part of seems to be a lot of the industry now. Then which ones have they checked, so that the client can then, if they want to, they can do their own check? Because if they've now got to confirm that they've had it, they're going to want to be more rigorous, I think.
Should be, yeah. I think that's the intent, isn't it?
Yes.
To force everybody to do it. Try and do it properly.
Well, how are you doing it, Martin? With regard to O&M information, for example, what's the method that BB would use to verify that? Are you just reliant on end systems or people like that to have done it, or is there some sort of?
Usually, I think generally it's done with the end user, the customer.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So it's planned from as early as possible, and it grows during the course of the contract. It's not a document transfer at the end of the job and there you go. It's part and parcel of the contractual sort of setup, if you like. But then these are really, really large projects.
Yes.
So they wouldn't be typical projects.
Yeah, sure. So if you were doing a resi development or something, I don't think you're doing any at the moment, are you? Yeah.
Wouldn't be.
Yeah.
No. Wouldn't be started. We're finishing off, some. But again, they're large.
Yeah.
You got your hand up, Phil?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Just a really interesting conversation here. Some of this I'm not as familiar with as yourself, but some of the things I'm just kind of picking up on for observations. In the screen grabs that Paul was showing in the matrix, when it took his PC quite some time to sort of generate that content with all the tick boxes, there was I don't know if you hear me, Paul, but there's a reference to the information sort of being supporting the golden thread. And I was just interested to know how does that work in real terms? Because it's one of the things that I've been focusing on.
I'll give you a quick explanation where we went to with this, right? Because what's in, and I was trying to dangle the carrot earlier, so I'm glad you've jumped onto it. So it's good. This is all good stuff. Now, because the thing is that we're only as good as a summation of all the people that we meet and the experiences that we get, and the way that we've tried to do it, and I thank everyone in these forums for it. George, everyone, Martin, Aid for putting up with us. To be honest with you, it's so important to get something that's complex and make it simple. Like I said earlier, we're all barking at the manufacturers. I can categorically tell you, it's not a manufacturer issue. It's us. We're not selecting stuff appropriately. We're not very good at it. And actually, to the point, we're going, you architects, you should know this. And they go, come on, Jesus, you know, this is malleability of materials and pipework systems and insulation to protect against thermal bridging or the corrosion risk in a space. Yeah, it's just their bag, isn't it? Yeah, you can go and ask as much as you want. So you've got to put things into perspective, and it's how the construction industry sees things, because they treat big buildings to a degree like it's a back garden extension. Bit bigger than that, isn't it? Right. So let me just bring this back up on the screen again, and I'll show you where we kind of got to, because should make it a bit clearer then. So pull that up on there, and if I bring it, I'm going to bring up the slightly longer version. So give me 1 second. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? Is it this one? Okay, so this is PFKG, but it's the same principle, right? So George has seen a lot of this. We gave stuff for that day, didn't we, George? So
yeah,
if I come down to I think the first thing is, right, probably for you, Phil, and actually if I put this on this screen, it should share it on that screen. Hold on. Fingers crossed here. Oh, you get so I've got to change the screen. Sorry, IT, I love a bit of IT, mate. Give me 1 second, sorry. Let's just, you don't need to see that. Stop sharing. Let's go share again. Now I'm going to go for that one. That's it. They should go onto the same screen. So it's probably worth considering, right, that we talk about, it's probably give the best examples. When I first spoke to George, probably 3 years ago, George, it must be, yeah?
yeah.
It's got to be, isn't it? And we went through, and George has been great with the platforms. We put stuff together around different subjects, how complicated, all the BIM, everything. We all got a lot more educated as a group about, no disrespect to things like 8644 or the other BIM one, 16650, whatever it is. I forget the number. What's the other one? It's brain's gone.
19650, right?
Yeah, it is
19650, right?
19650. Yeah.
It's all too high level. It's so high level, in fact, and I don't mean this to be rude, it ain't going to help us, right? It's going to make things probably a bit worse if we're not careful, because people follow something thinking we're measuring ourselves on a KPI against it, but it doesn't go to the right level of detail. You're actually measuring nothing. So that's what we looked at earlier. So forget all of that. What we kind of said was, is you've got to have a mechanism to get to a product that's appropriate to a circumstance. So we went, you know, and we had a big conversation with George around space risk. And we were like, oh yeah, just probably the better way to look at it. And what they amalgamated into, to be quite frank, I'm going to come down and forget all of this. Is it amalgamated into this, right? That every building has got, you know, a purpose group, and it's inside that purpose group you've got fire purposes, you know, the safety cases from left of a room to the right of a room. So a good example probably is, John, I don't know if this is factually correct, but it probably rings quite true in my own head, is that if you had a bandage store in a hospital, which is under HDMs and HBNs, you had a bandage store in a commercial office. The difference in classification of just the space risk is that the hospital may require you to have a door with a vision panel in it, which is fully resistant to smoke leakage, as well as a door being insulated. But in the commercial office, it just be an E-panel door. And the resistance periods could be different, because the risk is treated differently in the hospital because you've got people that are infirm, can't get out, etc. Does it make sense? So building purpose group has a direct link to actually space risk being higher in certain terms or lower in others, depending on the, you know, the people risk of the building. Then we looked at things in relation to that space risk. We said, well, some systems are static, some are transient, some are dynamic. So if you take things like a fire door, it's static, but actually it's transient. You can actually walk through it. It can be 2 leaves, 1 leaf, half a leaf, can be powered, non-powered, all these things that come into the function of that door before you look at the resistance period of fire. You want the vision panel in it as well, so people can see where they're going. This is the point I'm making earlier. Those components that go on there is a summation of DDA and security before you get to the function of the door. When you take things like fire dampers or pipes, they're static, they're in a wall. They don't move, they just sit there. They close up, it's done, nice and simple, like the wall static. When you get into things like smoke control, it's dynamic. You're performing a function, aren't you? You're taking something away, like sprinklers, you're putting something in. So this has an effect about how things operate, can have an effect on all the different parameters that you're looking at. Smoke control involves higher pressures, you know, sprinklers involves water. So you have to have a consideration of what it's doing in fire to make sure what you're putting in there doesn't cause a secondary issue, like you're putting water into a chemical or switch room. It's full of electricity. It's not a good idea, is it? So it gives you, that makes sense. You've got to look at how it operates. Once you know all of that, then you can actually put a classification number to meet that space risk in the purpose group and how you want it to kind of function. And this is what the manufacturers give you in the DOP. What we're then saying though, Phil, is that isn't the end of it. That's just now you've got something that meets the space risk and the functional requirement for that building. Now you've got to find something that works in a wall, which is the culmination of all the other products within it, and you've got to be able to install it, access and maintain it for future. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it comes from on a system approach, because the wall's got its own requirements to be fire resistant in EI terms, but there might be pressures involved. Some walls might need to be blocked because you're in labs and you've got a high pressure atmosphere. So the same conundrum exists, but then you've got a door, you might have pipes, trays, a flue, a chimney, smoke dampers, fire dampers. You might have, you know, kitchen extract, smoke control. Look at this here and you go, well, actually, everything works for this, but one, like the flue needs that. All of this has got to work with that. Can't just change the flue, you've got to change everything else. So unless you know how these things are all functionally working and the type of substrate they want, it's about thickness, it's about density, layers of board, it's about even about the density of the concrete. Like rack is even, you know, rack is listed in that standard. It's aerated concrete, it's 650 kilograms a meter cubed. Solid concrete's 2,200. So if you're testing air rate, which most people do, you can apply it to the thicker densities of concrete. So you have to look at how the thing's been tested, if that makes sense, because all the substrates need to be compatible. And not forgetting, you can't just do the Emmental cheese and make loads of holes in it and expect it to stand up, can you? The wall's still got to be fire safe. Sounds simple. So we did a couple of things around fire dampers. I know George has seen these before, and it's all in, you know, the stuff you sent. That's one damper in one wall. That is how bloody complicated it is.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean, Phil? So when you go to a manufacturer, they're giving you a classification of something that sits basically about here.
Yeah.
The rest of it is a combination of where you want to stick it. Do you know what I mean?
Yep,
So it's not,
I do.
yeah. So we managed, we got all this to work. This is what we've done with PFKG to get all this stuff to work within the same framework of the 5 selections. Because once you've got that nailed into a bit more of a graphical approach, and Ian's not here to talk, but if you look on FIS, I'll try and put it in the chat. We did an instruction video for this recently, and how you select one damper and one purpose group location. And some of it is for visual to say, look, that's the purpose groups at the top, shape and form, space risks. It was a case of you got a protected lobby, then you got to do, you know, like you just smoke, you got to do integrity. You know, insulation specific to risk of space, it's not required at national level, but it can be required in certain instances. It's a bit like fire doors, don't need to be insulated less than more than 25% of the length of the wall. You know, there's rules around it because you can't lean stuff up against a fire door, but you can lean stuff up against a wall, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So we just did it all graphically. Then how you get to all composite classification numbers, that's what it looks like in classification terms. That's what the manufacturer, that's the code that they need, is this one here. Then you come down and you go, well, that's all the frame types. This is all reflected in NAD 22, and it will be reflected in DL 145 eventually. But that's just like pushing a rock up a hill at the moment, getting that thing updated. But it gives people a visual of actually how certain things, you know, frame types exist and how they work. Some things only work with, some things work with both. Some things only work with drywall. Some things only work with brick and block.
Yeah,
You got to make sure.
I think it's a good graphical representation of actually how complicated it is, because I think that's sometimes what people don't appreciate, the complexity.
No.
But my observation here with this is that, and so I appreciate we're over time now, is that these here are all like subsets of the golden thread. They're all elements that you would do. Imagine the golden thread was a washing line, because ultimately the thread is linear.
Yeah.
It goes from kind of a end to end. You all of these elements here that you're discussing, you would hang those on the thread, like on a washing line, as kind of working practices or selection criteria or some other certification requirements. But ultimately, it comes back to what piece of information. Imagine the golden thread is a needle that you're going to thread through. Okay, on the end of the golden thread is a needle. Okay, that you're going to thread through all of this here. What is that needle?
That's it there. For that particular subject, that's your needle.
Or the classification.
All of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the classification though doesn't get say for instance, because again in my world I want to take all this information and pass that on a procurement order to a supply chain partner. What piece of information do I give them that also is the golden thread?
That's what you give them. That's it.
Is that what you would put on a purchase order?
You'd have to, yeah. So you go to the manufacturer and you do anything different, you'll get the wrong products.
Okay. What about the manufacturer's own information?
That will line up with the manufacturers. So if you take that, just so you probably don't know, Phil, is that obviously I've rewritten DW145, which is fire dampers. I've done that 22. I've got another guy called Paul White. We do the legal authority basically on fire dampers. So we've been for the manufacturers. This is how we come to this conclusion, including TG6 and ASFP. That is the code that you need. Because what I'm saying is it's not about the product, because the product is actually just this. It's about part L. So when you buy a damper, the first thing is, does it work for your part L? And if it doesn't, choose a different type of blade. You have to go through all of those bits before you get back to the level where you go, okay, now what do I need for fire safety?
And can the manufacturer tell you whether it will meet part L, or do you need to? You need to know. Yeah,
you need to understand that's appropriate. That's appropriate. That's the orientation that you want. That's the type of wall that it works with everything else, and that's the infill, the seal that you want. And you also need to satisfy yourself you can bloody install it. Yeah. Which all this comes out of national code and regulation, which is breakaway joints and distances for digital records for taking your photographs at the end. That's all it is. And that's your number. If you took pipework as an example, I don't know if I still got it in here, pipework, because I haven't finished doing it yet. No, it's not in there. We did pipework as well. Actually, I'll blow your brains out, Phil. We've done most of the subjects now. The other one, if you take fire resisting ducts as an example, this is work in progress at the moment. But you got different subsets.
Yes.
Did you know what I mean? I haven't even got onto smoke control yet. But the fact is that this is easy because actually there's only two types: it's either rigid or flexible. But the difference is you're now in a system which is not just static at a wall; it's transient dynamic. It's going through many different compartments. You've got anchors to consider. All these other things you've got to take into account before you do selection of the kit that you want.
Yeah. What one of the challenges I think, Phil, is that in some cases, and an increasing number of cases, because of competency and liability, the manufacturer is probably the one that is best placed to know about what is appropriate for certain circumstances. Certainly, in my experience, fire doors, they know a lot more about the regulations than the architects do. Right?
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah.
So therefore, what tends to happen is that the architects will send them the MBS specification and information about the design, and they'll say, come back to us with whether your products, which products are going to be suited to that. Now, what Paul's saying is, I don't know how that works with the building services side of things, but is it also the case, Paul, that a designer might send to a manufacturer, I need dampers that are going to satisfy this particular specification and this particular design?
The way we've kind of this works for doors as well, George, right? Is that when you look at building regulations, right? This is particularly well covered. That's particularly well covered. That's particularly well covered. So is that. So is that. Actually, so is that. So really, anything outside that becomes specific to a safety case. If you look at hospital and you've got a theatre, which could be ITU or, you know, ITC, what ones they've got in there, you'll have a slightly different thing where you might leave people in place. You know, you'll have a pressurization system to keep the patient safe while you're vacuuming people out. You can't cover something like that in this, but all you can do is say, actually, because it's clinical and it's sleeping, the same thing kind of kicks in, that you still want to have fire and smoke protection of those people. But you know, so this is pipe work, by the way. Pipe work is bloody mega complex, Phil. It's because you've got to protect it against the atmosphere. It might be protecting the atmosphere against the pipe. You've got to look at the bore thickness, its reaction to fire, because you can't put things like HDP pipework through a building if it's going through spaces that are protected, because it burns like hell. You know, it's noxious, it's nasty stuff. So you might want to use like cast iron throughout the building, which gives a secondary set of issues because you need to insulate the cast iron, or you don't with the plastic because it's a crush device. So what I'm saying is that there's a specific product which suits every safety case in a building. The problem is the manufacturers can't help you with it because they don't know the safety case of your individual spaces. We've got to the conclusion, you've actually got to go that side to that side. What does that do? What does that do? And can this do both protection? And if it's a dynamic system going through the building, you can't just take a bit of pipe work out locally like HDP and go, I'll put steel for it, because you put an open pipe in, haven't you?
Yeah.
Pins melt off and you're going through it, which is what's called uncapped.
I see what you're saying, and you know, it's something I'd like to explore a little bit more. But my view is of all of this is all. It all comes down to like selection and performance. It doesn't necessarily support a simplified golden thread, because you haven't still got down to a single piece of information that you can translate from that kind of cradle to grave. And if you look at some of the other processes that are perhaps not covered here, because these are all focusing on design and selection criteria, what about the information on a goods received note? What about the information on an invoice? How would you put in an RFID tag into the building? Should that be required?
This is what I'm saying to you right at the moment. I think Hackett said it very, very well. She said, actually, not only have we got a golden thread, we've got bloody hundreds of them, right?
Yeah.
And you go, she's absolutely right, because if you look at things from a raw engineering perspective, malleability materials, what's capped, uncapped, there is a thread for how you got to that piece of kit initially. Then you go into the second bit, which if you look in CPR points of view, it's basically factory control procedure, certificate of constant performance, and DOP. Then how you track that piece of kit against the number that you sent from cradle to grave, that's a different problem. And that's still a thread, but don't track something which is inherently wrong for the circumstances, because all you'll do is have a record of it getting installed and it'll be wrong. Does that make sense?
It does, and obviously we wouldn't want to do that. But as I said, I still see this information as kind of hanging vertically on a horizontal thread, because it doesn't. You don't necessarily pull the thread through all of this information. All that you've explained there links back to a single piece of information, a code, a reference, a unique identifier that you then move along to the next person. Because it may well be that it goes through a supply chain or a distributor for that matter. What piece of information does the distributor use?
The problem for it can't work that way. This is what's going wrong, right? So, to give you probably a good example, right? And the amount of stuff I tear out of buildings isn't because there's anything wrong with a fire damper. It'd be perfectly good in a different building, a different location. So it's not appropriate for that one. And that stuff is tagged. It's in a BIM model. It's barcoded. It's just fucking inherently wrong. Right? So this is the bit I'm trying to get away from, to make sure that we stop procuring the wrong kit. Because I don't forget at the beginning of this bit here, right? Yeah, this is it. Right, so that when we do the lectures on this externally, you've got to remember that a fire engineer has no knowledge of construction products, none at all. They don't understand anything about the classification requirements for any of these products. They don't know. They just say 300 degrees C, 1 hour, 2 hours. That's all they say. They do not know the products. They do length of hose rules, because fire engineering, if you don't know, it's about fire brigade operations, malleability of materials, and some chemical analysis. And I know because I've seen, I'm on IFE, but I've seen the courses that go with it. So they don't really know, right? Then you look at an architect, they might be able to say, well, I've got a shaft, I put shaft wall in everywhere. They don't know everything that goes within that wall. Does that make sense? It's all done in insular. even for the building services guys, they don't know how these products operate. They're going to go CDP. Someone else can deal with that. But you can't get a product unless you know, and this is us, by the way, don't tell anyone, Phil. We don't know, we just pass it all down the line, don't we? And you look at the specialist trade, they may install this, or someone may install that, but they don't understand how it's got to that. Because that's a summation of the building type, the space, how it operates, what's in the compartment, what it's protecting against. And you've got the product suppliers who can give you a product if you give them a classification number. And they can tell you how you install it in a substrate. They can't tell you that classification number's right, depending on your space risk, because they're not engineers in space risk. So the way the information is being transmitted is wrong. And this is all the quality assurance type. Once you've got that, then you can look at how you install it, how you measure quality, how you benchmark it, and then you can record digitally, actually, you've got the right product in the right location. Then you can do the information for future change management. And you are right, there is a piece on here on how you track products in like serial numbers from cradle to grave inside a factory to where it gets there. There is that piece as well.
That's one golden thread.
That's one individual golden thread. How you've delivered it, how you've got it there, how you've got to the right product is the hardest one. And that's why no one's tackled it. So you can't buy anything unless you know everything works. And Hal Davis would tell you the same thing. Unless you know how the damn thing works as a system with a wall, and it's actually performing to, for the space risk left to right or dynamically doing what it's got to do, you can't procure it. And that's where those numbers come into it. Don't forget, we've done all the inspection sheets, everything for 1, 4, 5, and NADC about how you inspect this kit as well. We're doing it for a few others. But you've got to be able to have a process on how you select stuff with a manufacturer. And that's how you do fire dampers.
Paul, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, me too, mate, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I feel it's worth having a catch up because there's many different parts to this. I'm not saying anyone's got anything wrong or anyone's work is tarnished or anything like that. I just think when you look at how you get to appropriate products, which is Regulation 7, we're really getting it wrong badly. And that's just, and I only say it because I deal with all the legal fallout. It's really getting it wrong badly. But it's all this stuff, we track stuff, we've got serial numbers, we've got delivery notes, all great, but it's just a wrong kit. That's the bit that's going wrong. Wrong trousers, Wallace.
Cool. Good. Thank you very much, everyone.
No, you too, Phil. Pleasure to meet you, buddy. I've got you on LinkedIn, I think, anyway. But we'll have a catch up, mate. It'd be good.
Yeah, look forward to that.
Cheers, guys. Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.